All right, so before we get started, we're going to just kind of take a look at the dev environment that we'll be using for this course, which is very simple. This is a Bootstrap front-end HTML, CSS course, so there's no complicated, development suites that we need to set up or server-side languages or anything like that. Basically, we're going to set up our text editor. Now, feel free to use whatever you'd like. If you use like Sublime Text or Notepad++ or Atom, that's fine. But what I would really suggest is VS Code or Visual Studio Code, which is just a fantastic editor for just about any kind of web development programming and even some other types of programming. It's very powerful, but it's also very simple, and it has some great extensions. So I just want to go over a couple extensions that I would recommend, and I also want to go over Emmet a little bit. Emmet is actually included by default with Visual Studio Code, so it's nothing we have to install extra. If you're using Atom, like we did in the first version of this course, then you'll have to install Emmet as a plugin. Unless by now they've integrated it, I'm really not sure. But most current text editors do have Emmet as a plugin if it's not included by default. So if we go over to this icon here, this is all the extensions I have. What I would suggest installing is one live server, because what this does is it allows us to just have a simple HTML file, which our themes will be HTML files, and it allows us to open up the file in a browser on our local host, and it includes autoload. So when we save, it'll automatically update in the browser. Okay, whether we save HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, it'll update automatically. And this is something that I always use when creating like static websites. All right, so I'd suggest installing that. You can search for it up here and just say install and reload. And then I'd also suggest, you don't have to do this, but I would suggest using Prettier, which automatically formats your code, and it does format HTML as far as like line breaks and indentation, stuff like that. If you want your code to match mine exactly, as far as spacing and so on, I would suggest installing this and setting the format on save setting to true, which I'll show you how to do. All right, those are really the two extensions that I would suggest. Everything else you see here doesn't really apply. Bracket pair colorizers is a really good extension, but it's more for hardcore JavaScript or PHP or other C syntax languages. VS Code icons I'm also using, which just shows the file icons on the side, depending on what type of file it is. So for the settings, you can hit Control or Command comma, or you can go down here and go to Settings. And most of this stuff you don't have to worry about. I set my font size a little bigger so you guys can see everything. Word wrap I set to on, so the code doesn't go outside of the page. It wraps. The tab size I like to set from 4 to 2, just so it's not so spread out. And this setting right here, editor.format on save, is what is going to make Prettier automatically format your file when you save it. Okay, so it'll basically make it look like mine. I also put the prettier.single quote to true, and this really applies to just JavaScript because I like to use single quotes. But if you want to, you can search for it, anything you want, like editor.format on save right here, and then you could click the pencil icon and set it to true, and it'll put it over here, or you can just copy it and put it over here. This is basically your customized options or settings. All right, and then once you're done, you can Control or Command S and save it, and that's it. All right, so what I'm going to do now is just give you a quick example of Emmet and the live server plugin. All right, and you guys don't have to do this. I just want to show you if you haven't used either of these before. So what I'm going to do is just create a test folder on my desktop here. I'll just call it test. Again, you guys don't have to do this. And if you want to open a folder in VS Code, you can right click and say open with code, or you could open it from your terminal if you have the folder open in your terminal, or you could in VS Code just say open folder and navigate to it, which is desktop test and select folder. Okay, so now we have that folder open on the side here, and I'm just going to create a new file called index.html. All right, and in this file, I'm going to use Emmet to create an HTML boilerplate. So exclamation and then tab should give us something like this, where it gives us the head body tags, the title, the meta tags, and all that. So we don't have to actually type this out. Now, as far as Emmet goes, like I said, in VS Code, it's by default. If you're using another editor, you're probably going to have to install it as a plugin or extension. So how Emmet works is, let's say we wanted an H1 with an ID of test. So instead of having to type out H1 ID equals test and then the ending tag, we can simply do H1 and then a number sign and then test and then hit tab. Okay, so that makes it much easier. If we wanted just an H1, we could do H1 tab. That'll give us the beginning and ending tag. If we wanted a class of test, we could do dot test and tab. All right, and then let's say we wanted a div with the ID of test. We could either do div number sign test tab, but we don't even have to put the word div. We can just do number sign test tab, and that will give us a div. All right, same thing with a class. We could do dot test tab. That'll give us a class. All right, another thing we could do is, let's say we wanted a list, a couple list items, like let's say we want 5. We could do li times 5 tab, and that'll give us 5 list items. And I do have a pretty extensive crash course on YouTube on Emmet if you want to check that out, if you want to get deeper into it. Another thing we can do is, if we want to just generate some sample text, we can say lorem and then a number, and that number is going to be the amount of words. So let's say lorem 40 tab, and that'll give us 40 dummy text words. So it's an easy way to fill in content. All right, instead of trying to think of your own stuff to write in there. So that's pretty much what we'll be doing with Emmet in this course. I'm not going to use Emmet too much in CSS, and we're not going to write that much custom CSS. We will be, of course, doing some in the projects, but not a ton. So what I want to show you next is how to use Live Server. So, of course, you need to install it. You can search for Live Server here, and it'll show up and hit the green install button. Once you do that, you should be able to right click and just say open with Live Server, and it actually opened on a different monitor, so I'm going to bring it over, and this is our actual HTML file, and I can just go ahead and put that on the side here, and let's just put something in this HTML file. We can let's see, we can close this up if we want, and we'll just put an H1 in here, and we'll just say hello world, and then I'm just gonna save with Control S, and there we go, it just pops right up. Okay, so any edits that we make, if I put an exclamation and save, I don't have to go up here and hit reload. So that's kind of the workflow we'll be using in this course, and that's what I would suggest. But again, you guys, you know, if you have a preference that you've been using, that's absolutely fine. Okay, you don't have to use Emmet, you don't have to use VS Code, you don't have to use Live Server, but it's just what I'll be doing. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention is, if you want to stop the server, you see down here where it says port 5500. If I click that, it's going to dispose of the server. If I reload, it's no longer going to work. And you'll see if it says go live, you can click that again to restart it, or you can, you know, open with Live Server. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. In the next one, we're going to kind of set up our Bootstrap sandbox environment, which is the custom learning UI that I created, where we'll have some predefined HTML, and then we'll look at each element of Bootstrap step by step throughout the course, and then we'll start on our projects a couple sections from now. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.